Good day and welcome to this exclusive interview with Foreign Secretary Robert Persaud, with responsibility for diaspora engagement and advising the Minister of Foreign Affairs on international trade. Robert, thank you for joining me this morning for this exclusive interview and letting the diaspora especially be updated and informed as to what is happening with diaspora engagement. So welcome and thank you.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. So let's jump right into it. I want to go a bit further because we've been talking already about the diaspora engagement strategy and what the ministry is doing. Now, coming out of the CSIS report, they talked about this issue of brain drain. And it is said that if the government does not address the issue of brain drain to ensure that people with tertiary degrees remain in the country, and to attract the diaspora members back to the country, development efforts in Guyana will remain undermined. Based on this statement, how challenging do you see your role?
Well, first of all, I want to say again, the report that which you refer to is very useful. It's useful as a policy tool and will be incorporated into the strategy and the plan of action we're developing here with support from the International Office of Migration. Coming to your specific point, that has been a perennial problem plaguing our development, going back to the 50s and the 60s, when we saw the first exit, or where you would have been saved, people just leaving in droves, going to different parts of the world, North America, Europe, the Caribbean, and elsewhere. And since then, we've suffered a lot as a result of the brain drain. Qualified people, not only people who are qualified, but persons who are also had money to invest, entrepreneurs. And so we've lost a lot of our good people. Perhaps we continue to lose those. And that is why this approach of how can we check, how can we interrupt, as it were, that flow of brains and also of dollars and of skills and our best resource, our country's best resource is human capital. So how can we check that? How can we disrupt, as it were, that exodus that we've seen been taking place for many decades? And that is a context within which, and one of the objectives of the diaspora engagement is how can we mobilize and engage and take initiatives that we can see that exodus, that, as it were, that brain drain, skills, dollar leaving our country, but rather how we can turn that around and have that developed right here in Guyana.
Mm-hmm. So you have an important task ahead of you of bringing remigrants to Guyana. How do you see, how challenging is this role for you?
It has to be a concerted effort by all. And it's not only an effort that has to be or should be driven by government. And as referred to in the report and based on case studies we've looked at across how it is that the diaspora in different countries and different groups, how were they engaged, how were they mobilized, how were they attracted, how were they used as an important resource base for the development and transformation of various countries. And we believe also that an essential component would have to be remigration. That is why within the ministry, we've created a department for diaspora affairs, but within that department, there is a section that looks at remigration. And that is why, even during the election, the president has made it quite clear that there will be additional incentives for persons who want to remigrate, whether it be developing of housing schemes, looking at job opportunities, looking at investment. But this is not something that would be driven singularly by government. We want the private sector, we want civil society, we want different groups and associations and bodies in the diaspora and here to be part of that effort. So our approach is taking a very holistic approach, a unified approach, and not government running out on its own and government thinking that it has all the solution and can do it all, but rather to bring more and more concerned and relevant players in. That is why our emphasis is on engagement, involvement, and also trying to reach out and constantly keeping and involving all those who want to play a part in this effort of remigration and as it were, giving some more life to the efforts of our diaspora to get them involved in Guyana's development.
Another aspect of the report talked about ethnic conflict, economic instability, and corruption, and so forth. How will this same holistic approach that you talked about, how will that unit, the Diaspora Engagement Unit, work with other arms in the government to see how we can address these concerns that were raised and that the diaspora is very concerned about, especially security concerns?
You know, government and our effort has to be linked with the national plan, the national development plan, the vision that has already been articulated by the president, where we want to transform this country, where we want to go. We want to create a country where there are opportunities for all, where there's political, social stability, where you have economic opportunities, where people can feel free to engage in various forms of economic opportunities, benefiting from the traditional sector and even the new sectors that are coming on board. Take, for instance, oil and gas, which will be a catalyst for other sectors, not only for oil and gas, primarily, but we can see a slew of other sectors and subsectors coming as a result of resources that will be garnered from that. But we want to build a society in which all can play a part, all can enjoy the benefits. And that also requires some level of what we call constitutional reform, electoral reform, ensuring that we put the necessary means and mechanisms in place to safeguard against the types of conflicts, mismanagement, corruption, and have greater participation and involvement through the modernization and reform of our constitution, and look at our relevant laws and create a regime, a framework in our country that address those matters. Security has always been an issue for Guyana, and we're not only unique in that regard. And we've looked at the other cases where, how other countries have handled those, especially when it relates to the concerns of the diaspora. And we believe that with the focus that we have and the commitment, we'd be able to address those. But it is something that is a priority for the government. The president, the prime minister, the vice president, ministers of government have been speaking on this, and the investment and that we've been given to the security forces too. And then there will be renewed focus on how it is that we can properly, as it were, resource our security agencies in this regard to have that addressed. But it all has to be seen in this framework whereby we want to modernize and create a society that is stable and where there's inclusion and participation by all sectors, all groups, persons of all persuasions in our development effort.
Working with Peter Ramsarup at G-Invest, how will you work, the two units work to cut red tape and bureaucracy to make it easier for diaspora and any investor?
Well, the president has made it clear that he wants a single window arrangement whereby, rather than persons have to be running from office to office, desk to desk, have a single window arrangement where investors, and that is where I think with a renewed focus on G-Invest with Mr. Ramsarup there, I'm quite sure we will be able to advance that. There are already a number of proposals where persons would have come to us here at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation, and then we would have facilitated them where they have proposals and how it is we can establish the single window, whether it's for investors, whether it's for you to get permits, just getting business done with ease, without, as you refer to as red tape, without frustration, and the problems that are associated with that. So it is also part of that modernization plan, but we try to relate. We have a lot of constant interaction and engagement. So as much as when, we will get the feedback from the diaspora investors, and we will try to coordinate as much as possible with Go-Invest, G-Invest, so that we can all be able to, as it were, smooth things out, make it much more efficient, make it much more functional. That will take some time. So I don't want people expectations to say that they turn up next week, and we still have to do the following. We have to modernize, we have to make some changes in the organization, we have to look at some of our laws too. We have to build capacity to do what I'm referring to, take for instance, the single window or some of the other irritants. But there is a commitment and work has started on that. And again, we have to see government as being integrated. We all try to complement each other and to, as it were, to realize the objectives and the vision of the president.
with engagement from the diaspora, what are some of the areas that they have expressed interest in to invest and so forth? What are they interested in?
Every nearly every flight that comes to Guyana over the past several weeks, there are a number of Guyanese who are on those flights, and they're here looking and searching for opportunities, and that's a good sign. Whether it's in the hotel, whether it's in the entertainment, whether it's in the service sector, whether it's also in terms of real estate, housing development, infrastructure development, even in terms of persons looking looking for joint ventureship with existing businesses, some looking in terms of the financial sector. So what I would say is there's not in one particular area, some in food production themselves, people looking in terms of modernizing healthcare. And it's a very dynamic situation in the sense that, there's so many opportunities that persons are exploring. And what we seek to do is to give the best advice we can, but at the end of the day, that's a private initiative. We can only point to where those opportunities are, and perhaps allowing as much as we can facilitate and enable the diaspora to get involved. So their interests have been right across the spectrum of the traditional, as well as what we see as some of the emerging sectors of the economy.
Mm-hmm. So you're saying there are already possibly hundreds of interests expressed?
I wouldn't want to put a quantity, but I can tell you it's, for instance, this week alone, I have, and this is just speaking from my office alone, I have about 7 Guyanese businesses, potential investors from the diaspora who are here and who want to be updated on some of our plans from the perspective of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation. So just take that as an example. I'm quite sure if you speak to Go Invest, there might be a longer line. I'm sure if you speak to the office at present, a much longer line, and so we can see this happening around. Things are buzzing, people are coming, but again, I want people to also not to have high expectations or unreasonable expectations, but rather to search out the opportunities, make the best business decision, and they can be assured and rest assured that government is here to facilitate, to enable, and to, as much as possible, make things happen to the best interest of our national economy and development.
Mm-hmm. You talked about the Diaspora Desk at the consular post. How will this desk function?
We want to make our missions all across the world, wherever we have missions or consulates. We want them to be economic agents of the country, not only providing the routine diplomatic services, whether the bilateral cooperation programs or the multilateral cooperation program or consular services, but we want to make all our missions economic watch posts, as it were, whereby our officers will now be oriented to be able to serve the diaspora in terms of providing information, arranging, as it were, the types of engagement they're looking at, keeping them up to date, pointing them to where the opportunities are. Also to be that, as it were, that service provider to the diaspora in terms of being responsive to their queries as much as possible, what support we can offer and provide. So it is making that extra effort. Also searching out economic opportunities. Maybe they may be a business in Guyana looking for a partner in the US. We want that information to be able to be transmitted to our office, and they themselves too, in their interaction would say, there's this opportunity that has come up, right? And just make that connection and let things happen. So it is to make it that spark. Make it that spark for more greater economic activity and involvement of the diaspora. And that's where we see the desk and these officers now, which would be who will be placed in the various missions and consulates. That is the type of role that we envisage for them, where people can go in and get the type of information, the type of service, but be that spark for greater participation and involvement of the diaspora back in Guyana.
It sounds like indeed that this program and the strategy, the plan of action is a very structured approach that the government has. And I must ask you this question based on what happened in the past. There have been lots of, talk and, programs, but nothing concrete came out of it. How optimistic can we be that everything we're talking about now will take place?
You know, as I said in the beginning, this has to be a unified effort. It's not only the role of government to make all the things that we're talking possible. In fact, 90% of it will have to be taking place at the level of civil society, the private sector, individuals, the various associations, the various groups, and so forth. But our role is to facilitate. Our role is to, as it were, lay the conditions, create the incentives, create that arrangement whereby things can happen. That's the most we can do as government in terms of trying to facilitate and try to have a conducive environment. A lot of it will have to be, a lot of the heavy lifting will have to be done by the private sector, members of the diaspora working here with various groups, associations, agencies, and entities. So it is one in which all of us, and that is why we're investing a lot of time in explaining what our plans are, coming up with a broad strategy rather than doing things in a piecemeal way, a very comprehensive strategy, and whereby we will identify in our plan of action the specific roles and responsibilities of where government will be engaged in, where members of the diaspora would be, the private sector. So each one of us would have a clear appreciation of our role to make this happen. One element, one part alone working can't make it happen. Including the government alone cannot make this happen. It has to be, has the buy-in, the support, and the activism of the broad spectrum of those who are directly and indirectly related to the diaspora. So I would say if there's the will, if there's a commitment by all, we will be able to as it were, to change that, as you said, many efforts, we haven't really been able to make the type of success. I'm much more optimistic that, of the approach that we're taking, and I'm quite sure with the support and the buy-in, we can make it happen. But it has to be a unified, has to be a joint, a very inclusive approach in terms of how we engage and sustain diaspora affairs and remigration as a whole.
So I have one last question before we close. How do you plan to engage Guyanese in Guyana to be more welcoming to remigrants and so forth, because we know there is a bit of tension there, whether they think that people want to come back to take jobs or that kind of thing. How do you plan to engage people on the ground?
First of all, we want them to know that they are part of the diaspora strategy. They are part because they can benefit from the opportunities. If you have a business, you need skills, and not all the skills we need to make things happen in Guyana are available. So from the private sector standpoint, they will see this as an opportunity where they'll be able to attract skills. You may have a business that needs to grow, but may need capital. So here might be an opportunity for a joint venture, someone coming there. You may take for instance, a young person trying to start up an enterprise. Someone coming from the diaspora looking for opportunities, not going to take, but rather complement. So it is showing that linkage in terms of the well-being and the growth of various sectors of Guyanese. Our own development can be complemented by the involvement and participation of the diaspora. So it is not a competition, but rather I see it as more as complementary of what we're doing nationally. And persons here in Guyana, I think people are getting to understand, whether it be foreign investors, whether it be local investors or Guyanese, the diaspora investors, I think they recognize that our economic fortunes are growing and we need more persons to be involved. Our people development, we've been stagnated for a while. We need to, as it were, leapfrog. We can't leapfrog on our own with those of us who are here in Guyana, but also we need to engage and bring the hundreds of thousands of Guyanese who are abroad, get there, whether they're human capital, whether they're financial resources, their experience, their networking, have that involved, because that will certainly allow everyone in Guyana to experience and as it were, to benefit from the opportunities and the potential we've talked about for generations in terms of realizing that potential. So, we will continue to educate, advise, engage the various bodies, the public at large, using the media, both in the traditional media, but the social media, and let people understand that, members of the diaspora coming to Guyana to invest their work is not a threat, rather it's a plus and should be more welcoming, and we should be looking at more avenues how we can involve and engage them, because there's so much that's going to take place in this country that, the 800,000 of us here alone will not be able to develop, but we will need another 800,000 perhaps from the diaspora to come back here and to move this country forward and to make it, as it were, the Dubai of the region.
Mm-hmm. Foreign Secretary Robert Persaud, I want to thank you so much today for coming on the program and bringing us up to speed and letting us know what's happening on the ground in Guyana as it relates to diaspora engagement.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for watching. I'm Jennifer Jabbar.